So let's move straight on now to the science of scouting. It's a fascinating panel on scouting, and we're going to ask whether it is more art or science. Data has certainly changed the scouting landscape, but can too much analysis lead to paralysis? The days of Brian Clough courting a player by personally driving 200 miles to his home are perhaps gone, but does gut or football instinct still trump data? To discuss, I am delighted to be joined by Liverpool's chief scout and the former Northern Ireland international Barry Hunter, that's why he's wearing a green shirt, and the ex-Liverpool manager and current global head of football at Red Bull, Gérard Houllier. Barry, afternoon to you. Thanks also for joining us here on Soccerex Connected. I know you don't make too many media appearances, and congratulations on Liverpool's recent title. Let's get some opening remarks from you first and foremost. The title of this panel is Scouting, Art or Science? What's your take?
Afternoon, Ben. Basically, it's both for me. You know, you've got the art, you've got the gut feeling, the instinct, the intuition, the tacit knowledge, whatever way you want to call it, and you have the data. But one thing's for sure, it's not rocket science. You know, it's simple. It's about good people, the right people, good processes, clear structures, everyone aligned. There's a lot of talk nowadays, you know, about being everyone together and this culture and this identity. You know, those are the main things for me. And you really need to use as many tools as possible. And data is essentially another tool. But there's still, you know, it still comes down to people. Players are people. It still comes down to personal stories. So, you know, I think it's a real use of all the different tools that are around at the minute.
And Gérard, what's your take as well? Scouting, art or science? Obviously, you can provide the perspective of manager and now global head of football at Red Bull. Do you place a heavy emphasis on science, or do you still prefer to go first and foremost with gut instinct?
We use both. We need both. In my time, it was only gut feeling or the eye that would determine whether it's a good player to take on or not. But now, even with Red Bull, you try to reduce the number of errors that you can have, and you can do that maybe with facts, data, and that's why we need to be not only in football or only in data. We need both.
Well, there we go then. The answer's both. End of panel. Gérard, Baz, thanks very much indeed for joining me. Of course, we are going to delve into a lot more detail and talk about the specifics. So, Baz, what kind of attributes do you need to be a scout? And is it important that you even have the art and the science, or can you separate the two? So, for example, could you at Liverpool or wherever you work hire someone that only knows football and somebody that only knows data?
Yeah, you see, you were looking for an argument today, weren't you? You were looking for the dinosaur against the data. I know what you were trying to do, but that's fine, no problem. We're used to it. Listen, it comes down to both, really, as we've said. And you can have a mix in your department. You can have ex-players that maybe know that feeling, that come from a traditional football background. But now, thankfully, there's a lot more diversity in football clubs, and you can come from all different type of backgrounds. It's essentially gelling them all together, building the team. We can all find out all the strengths and weaknesses that they can bring to the department. Now there's a lot more analysts, have now come into football. The data guys, our data guys are good guys, so we have a personal relationship with them. It makes it easier to have discussions or arguments, as the case may be. So in that respect, you use the strengths of each individual and their background and what they can bring to really gel the whole department together.
Gérard, how do you balance the needs of individual clubs at Red Bull versus the wider strategy? Because you don't obviously only oversee one specific club, and there's good examples of pathways through the respective Red Bull linked clubs. Naby Keita is obviously the most famous, going from Salzburg to Leipzig and ultimately Liverpool. In your role, are you looking at a group strategy or specific club needs?
You could also mention Mane, because Mane went to Salzburg first before joining Southampton and then Liverpool. I think you need to know the profile of the player. Usually, for Salzburg, we try to have young players, not necessarily post-adolescent, but players between the age of 20 and 25, and players that can fit in the system, that can fit it in the philosophy of play that we have, which means they have to be technical, of course, and also very quick. But when you
scouting is understandably
scouting to me is very important. I mean, I think it's Shankly who used to say that one of the most important moments in the season is before the season starts, which is that where they sign new players. The signing of players can really change the face of your team and also your results. Look at Liverpool before Alisson and Van Dijk came. It's a different team. It's a different. I mean, the result came about practically as soon as Alisson and Van Dijk were in the team. Games that were a bit edgy suddenly became one.
Baz, before we get into the specifics of art versus science within scouting, there's kind of an art to just become a scout in the very first place because it is so secretive. It's not like clubs are there teaching you. It's not like there's a whole string of best practices around. So how did you get into scouting, and what's your advice to others that wish to follow that path?
Thankfully, there's different avenues now. I played and then coached and then tried to manage and came through that route. But we have a mix of guys who were video analysts, performance analysts. Some played to scholarship level, some only played at university, some didn't play at all. So there's various routes into it now, and it's the senior people like myself. It's sort of our responsibility to bring them through, to develop them, to help them. I think it's the best to learn on the job, and it's totally different. It's changed in the last 5 years, never mind 10 years. Gérard will tell you it's changed from a long, going way, way back. It's a totally different game now. Everyone's competing for the same players, but certainly I think the similarities between Red Bull and ourselves is we look for value. We look for the unsexy players to try and build a team. And you can only do that if you're aligned and you're joined up and you work with good people, and you have a clear process and structure. So it's interesting, Gérard, here talking about the players he signed for Red Bull, went through the Red Bull pathway. I don't think those players could come straight into a Premier League academy. They need to go through that journey. And again, we go back to the journey and the personal story that each individual has, the bumps in the road, to ultimately playing for one of the top clubs.
Gérard, what were some of the specific challenges with Leipzig? Because when a team gets promoted that quickly and then suddenly finds themselves in the Champions League, each squad that you've built can almost be outdated because it's strong for a particular league or level, but in a very short space of time you need to elevate the squad. Did that present challenges, or was part of the long-term strategy to find young players that could make steps up in class very quickly?
There were not only young players, there was 2 or 3 experienced players who were alongside the young ones that came on. But the young ones, you need first, of course, Barry would tell you, but individual level of skill, very important, the intelligence, the hunger, and the attitude. That's the main attribute that you would try to find in a player. And if this is backed by data, by match analysis of those players, usually you take on the player. And as Barry said, you need to have different steps. Some can go straight from the academy to the first team. They're very seldom. Steven Gérard was one example, but I think a lot of players need some time to do their steps and their various stages and go up maybe to a certain level. And for Mane, I think it was good that he spent 2 successful years in Salzburg before going to Southampton getting used to the league, and then joining Liverpool, where he's at his best. I think you need, I would say, a combination of both. For the players we took, it was always regarding 4 criteria. As I said, skill, intelligence, the desire, and also the attitude. The attitude is very important. There's some players that sometimes we didn't take because of the attitude.
And Gérard, sorry Ben, Gérard, how much video do you guys use watching players?
A lot. Yeah. I mean, now with all the tools that you have, practically, even a player playing in Guinea, you can see him play. I mean, it's incredible because that's where the match analysis of players became more effective between the year 2005 and now. That's where practically it has developed and blossomed. Before that, I mean, the start of match analysis of your match started, I think, in 1992, 93. And of course, the first World Cup to have match analysis was the World Cup in France in 98. But now you can have data not only on the collective sense, but also in the individual. You can see the number of balls is won, the number of tackles is won, the number of yards it has run, and so on. So this is why I think this is very important, because when you recruit a player, what you need, your obsession is to reduce, I would say, the probability of a failure. Of course, sometimes, you have all the data and you have all the gut feeling you can have about it. And maybe the player didn't adapt because of his wife or because he was homesick and so on. Sometimes, it goes behind you. But all I can tell you is we now are able to have an investment which is, I would say, well calculated.
Baz, Gérard mentioned there some attributes that are quite hard to measure. Of course, you can use gut instinct, but potential, and if you extend that, how's a player going to settle into a new city, a new climate with new teammates? There are lots of important things, aren't there, when you're scouting a player that you can't necessarily use data to specifically quantify. So how, when you do bring in the science, do you try and implement useful metrics, even in those areas, like I say, that are relatively hard to accurately quantify?
I would say, Ben, it sort of goes back to personal relationships. I'm not sure that the metrics and science can help you a great deal when you're trying to identify his character, his personality, his behavior, his background, the bumps he's had in the road. What type of guy is he? Is he friendly? Does he sign an autograph? Does he shake hands? Does he help with the stuff after training? Is he got foundations, charitable foundations? And there are ways of finding that information out. Maybe that's for another day, but each club has their own way of doing it. And obviously, here it's really important that we find the right type of player that can fit into the culture and ultimately play for the first team. So there are ways of really finding out the immeasurables, really, and each club has their own way of doing it. It's ideal if you're sort of in the shadows and no one really knows you and what you look like, because you can go ahead and get that information. And scouts have almost, our guys in the regions have almost, become sort of investigators, as opposed to just, what they would be termed previously as just watching players. They gather the financial information, they gather the data and the information regarding what the market's doing, individual players, their characters, their backgrounds, their families, and that information might not be used for 2 to 3 years, but it's a constant gathering of information to try and help you build up a picture.
Gérard, on that point, how do you ensure secrecy at Red Bull, particularly when you're attending matches in person? Because there's Barry, sure, he played for Reading, Northern Ireland, Rushden and Diamonds. So if he goes to Portrush, everyone's chasing after him for an autograph. But if he sneaks into a League Two match and nobody sees him, he's probably going to be okay. But you're Gérard Houllier, you're known as an ex-Liverpool manager. How do you ensure that you keep your targets secret when you are a relatively visible presence?
I disguise myself in a Coca-Cola man. No. Well, when I go and see a player, it's usually, of course, people notice that I'm there, and usually I talk about other players. I never mention that player. And suppose I go and see. I remember I went to see Keita the first time. I said I was not there for Keita, I was for another player. But obviously, it's Keita that was interesting to see. But Nabi knew about that. So it was funny. Sometimes you need several opinions. I mean, it's good sometimes to see it several times, but sometimes also if you trust somebody. But the big players, the top players, you don't need the others' opinion because you've got to be quick or they go somewhere else. So the big players, your opinion is important. You say, yes, go ahead. Like we did, for instance, Upamecano. Upamecano was 17 when we scouted him.
Baz, people will look at the data and they'll be wondering what the value is of attending a football match, given that videos are always available. Analysts can look at every little minute detail. And I appreciate from a Liverpool point of view, you won't be able to go into too much detail. Part of doing your job is protecting that secrecy. But what can you tell us about the value of actually attending matches?
We use video every day. Our guys use video, I use video every day. But to go live, once you get a feel for the person, you get a feel in the flesh for how he moves, the size he is, the size potentially to become, what his frame's like, if you're talking about a younger player. You can compare him, if you pick the correct matches, you can compare him in terms of speed, pace, off the mark, how he turns. You can compare what height his shoulders are, how thick his shoulders are, where he stands up when he's picking at a corner or defending a corner, picking someone up. You can compare all these things to certain people and certain levels. If you pick the right games, you pick away games, you pick home games, you pick games 3 days after they've been with the national team. There's been a story in the paper. So, going live, and also, thankfully, a lot of people want to talk. And if you go in amongst the supporters, most supporters generally know, they watch their team week in, week out. They generally have a fair idea. So you'll hear what's being said. If you go in and around the scouts, a lot of scouts like to talk about themselves and talk about what they should have done, what they could have done. So they'll give up information. So really, it's vital. It also saves you a lot of time, video from, travel time, but it's crucial to also go live.
Gérard, give me some insight into the relationship between a chief scout or a head of football or even a scouting team and a manager, because you've got those two unique perspectives now as head of global football at Red Bull, where you're dealing with a number of clubs and managers, and then when you were in charge of, say, Liverpool, and you were yourself working with a scouting team. So tell me a little bit about both relationships, and has your perspective on that relationship changed now that your role has flipped?
The modern manager now needs to know, he wants to know some particular characteristics, some particular details about the player, because that he will know whether he's a big engine or not, whether he can run fast or whether he can run for long. So that's fine. That's really something you can get through, I would say, match analysis performance, individual match analysis performance. But normally the manager likes to know also a bit about the mentality of the player. The mental side is the roof. What is under the roof is, of course, the tactics, technique, and the physique. But whether it's a physique, technique, or tactique, this is affected if the roof is leaking. So that means you need to sometimes meet the player, or maybe get as much information you can have through colleagues or through, I would say, secret sources, to know whether the player will fit in your team or not, and whether he will be able to be at the very, very top level.
Ben, just sorry quickly,
Baz,
the days of a manager driving to the door of a player and knocking his, that's actually illegal, you know, mate.
So that's illegal,
You can have
what
a drink.
isn't, what isn't illegal is planning.
I'll tell you what,
like you say,
Ben, I'll tell
please,
you a
Gérard,
story.
go ahead.
The first time I went to see Houllier, he was not even playing the position I was looking for. I saw him and I had the chance to meet him after the game. It was very pure coincidence because, I was waiting, talking with some friends and so on, and he came early. I don't know why. And I offered him to have a coffee somewhere. And we did, and I decided that day, I phoned Peter Robinson, who was the chief executive of Liverpool at that time. I decided that day to sign him. Because sometimes the direct contact can reveal a type of personality that you say, oh, we can work upon the player. He will be good. And he did 10 years in Liverpool.
It's a great point. Great point, that, Ben.
Baz, let me just bring you in here on the planning front, because I think there's maybe a false perception out there that as windows start to close, every single club, every single scout, every single manager is in a mad rush, a mad panic. And no doubt there are occasional opportunistic signings, especially if a series of players move and it creates a domino effect. But generally speaking, I presume at least, you're planning 1 or 2 windows ahead, aren't you? So when that transfer deadline day comes, if you've done your job effectively, you'll be at home in your slippers, having a cup of coffee, watching Sky Sports News and laughing almost at all the other clubs in a mad rush because your business is done.
Yeah, on those occasions, we like to be in Melwood together, watching it on the screen with a takeaway. And we're usually trying to maybe move some players out on loan at the time, but we like to get everything done as early as possible, to give the manager a good chance pre-season to bed in. But ultimately, if you do something early in the window, it seems to get forgotten late in the window because you're not active. So it's the old yellow tie Sky Sports syndrome. Some clubs enjoy it, some clubs take it to the wire, but we would generally tend to try and stay away from that if possible.
Gérard, all managers still will want autonomy over signings, whether the clubs that they're working for have specific systems, whether they have multiple people making decisions, whether it's an older school club or just a lower club down the league, so they have less resources and thus the manager has to scout a little bit more. So fundamentally, how do you ensure that managers are kept happy? Because seemingly, the bigger the budgets and the bigger the club, the more people are involved in the scouting process. Is it a case of employing the right manager that's prepared to work under that system? Or is it a case of still allowing whoever the manager is and whatever his personality is to still always have final say?
The final decision is usually taken by 3 people. That's where the manager needs to have people he trusts and he knows them well. It's a head of scouting, like Barry, and the director of football. Because they will have all the data and they will also have gathered probably the feelings of the other scouts. You can't have 20 people around the table to decide whether we sign a player or not. But the manager will probably rely on those 2, the head of scouting and the director of football. And Liverpool have got 2 good ones.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
Very
they
good.
certainly do.
Just on that, Gérard, but it's important that the manager is challenged, isn't it? From an honest, an honest viewpoint, that's challenged, that's helped, and you have a manager that's open to those type of discussions, it enables you to get to that decision to help them and assist them. But I think it's important that you have a manager that listens, is open, and that comes down to the relationship, doesn't it?
Yeah. I fully agree with that. I mean, it's a human thing at the end. So the relationship between the people in charge is very important.
It goes back to good people again, doesn't it?
Trust.
Good people. Yeah. I'm very fortunate. I'm surrounded by very good people here. So it helps, really does help.
Barry, you alluded there to good people, and we've just touched upon that relationship between manager and, let's say, a chief scout. But what about your own perspective? So presumably you're kind of stuck in the middle in the sense that you're senior and you liaise with the manager and the playing staff, but then you've got all the other staff that work on a scouting team. So what's it like being advised by the analyst, the scientific guy, someone like me, good looking, intelligent, wearing glasses, graduated from Oxford, knows a lot about maths, but maybe knows nothing about football? What's it like taking advice from someone that says, Barry, data says this? I might not know that much about football, but data says this. You have to listen to me.
We've had that, and you have to sort of open your mind up, and so what? Instead of us fighting back and pushing back, we're like, have we missed something? Let's go and check again. Let's go and review. Yeah. And if you have a relationship with people, and you connect on a personal level, it makes it easier. Our structure is quite simple. So Michael and Jürgen speak almost every day, either WhatsApp or on the phone, or they see each other. Dave's also Dave Fallows as well, who's not spoken about a lot. Incredibly smart guy, incredibly humble, and I speak to the scouts more on a daily basis, do more of the traveling. And between the three of us, really, and Jürgen and ownership, you get this collective. But ultimately, you need to be able to have conversations with people, and you can't dismiss. If someone comes up with an idea about a player, okay, go on then, let's hear it, explain it, give them the time to give them the confidence that they can speak up, not put people down. It needs to be that sort of environment. And yeah, it's a tough environment, challenging environment, but it needs to be like that to be successful.
And Gérard, you're part of a very forward-thinking group in Red Bull, and we all know about Leipzig's ambition and plans and the success that you've already achieved on the field. So many congratulations on that. What does the future hold? Scouting is obviously evolving day by day, year by year, decade by decade. Is it going to get more scientific? How do you protect the integrity of just individual football brains? Because presumably the more technology that's available, the more certain quarters, certain clubs, certain individuals will want to use that technology. And like I said right at the very beginning of this panel, there is a danger, isn't there, of analysis, paralysis by analysis, I should say. So what do you think the future of scouting holds? Is it going to get more scientific?
It will probably be fine-tuned, that's for sure. You can't go against progress, whatever the field. But I still think that because this is why I think it's more art than science. Art is not perfect, and sometimes there's some criteria or some elements that you don't control. But whereas science is precise, concrete, and always accurate. So that's why you need both, really, because it's a human thing, that you may have sometimes difficulty, and you may have, you don't know why it doesn't work. You had all the elements, whether there were the data, whether there were the football side that you yourself saw, and then you were managed, you saw several times, you had maybe a feeling that it was the right person, and it doesn't work. It happens. This is why I think that scouting must be a very specific job and a very difficult art, because you want to reduce that sort of mistake, that sort of error.
Gérard, do you agree? It will still come back to people. Players are people. The personal side, the personal story.
Yeah, you're right.
And making sense of all that information, all that data, someone still has to make sense of all that, present it to the manager, to the board, to the ownership, to bring the player in, and you're sort of limiting your risk.
But this is one of the appealing side of the job, Harry. But being able to have both is important.
So true.
And Barry, if I could just come in here and get a little bit of insight from an earlier part of your career, because of course you were manager of Rushden and Diamonds as well. And what I want to ask you is advice to lower league clubs, to smaller clubs that don't have the data scientists and the analysts, that don't have the big budgets, that can't cover huge global territories. What did you learn about being player manager and effectively head scout, almost anyway, at Rushden and Diamonds? What kind of challenges did that present where you lack resources? And what advice, now that you're at Liverpool, would you give to other clubs, perhaps watching this and saying, that's all very well for Liverpool, that's all very well for Red Bull, but it's completely different for us as a League One or League Two club?
Well, it's not really completely different. It's similar, because you're still trying to get players that fit the way you want to play, fit your budget, fit your club, fit your dynamic, fit, so you still have the same challenges, just obviously slightly different, a lot different in some cases, but in others they're not. So it's the same process. Find the right players. How can we get them in? Recruitment's a massive part of the job. Not just identifying the players, right? What's the strategy to get him in? How are we getting him? Does he want to come? Is he our type? How do we do it? Managers in League Two, League One, and they do that every week. They just do it with a smaller group. I was fortunate. I had a guy called Houllier alongside me who's really experienced. So it's similar problems. It's just different ways. Now we're fortunate. We have more tools to be able to make better decisions. But I think the clearer you are, it's a lot easier, and the good people around you.
And Gérard, if I could just ask you about the structure at Red Bull, is it fair to say that the Red Bull group, with a number of different clubs, is closer in structure to the City group than, say, Liverpool? And what are the advantages when you scout players of having more than one club as part of your group? Because I would assume it minimises the risk in some ways, because you don't have to catapult a young player you like straight into Leipzig. You can move them through your system potentially, and that collaboration allows you to maybe take on more names and develop younger players before they're thrown into the limelight.
Hello? I've lost you.
We may just have lost Gérard's sound there. Gérard, can you still hear us?
Yeah.
Did you catch the question okay?
I think I missed the last part.
I was just asking you about the advantages of having a group like Red Bull, much like the City group. Does it minimise the risk, or does it allow you to use younger talent at clubs lower down the pyramid first to avoid throwing them straight into the limelight?
Strasbourg is a good stepping stone to another level. And sometimes the players, there's one thing they want to know is whether they're going to play or not. If they can play at a professional level, a decent level, knowing they're young and they have to, I would say, make their way into the first top team, they think that sometimes it's good to have that. Personally, I think the best latest part of Sadio Mane's development was in Salzburg. It was because he was playing every game for the title, and also so he was used to have some kind of pressure, but also he could perform, I would say, more freely than anywhere else. And then he went to Southampton. So you see, it's you do several steps to the top. I personally think that in Leipzig, we have three teams mainly: Leipzig, New York, and Brazil. But it's true that now Leipzig, the the youth team are playing at a very, very important level, very good level. The reserve is playing in the 3rd division, so that means really they can progress through the club now, and this is very, very important for the players here. When you talk to a player, I mean, at the end of the day, Barry said it, you got to convince the player. You got to attract the player to your club, you got to convince him, and the financial side is one way, but also the sportive side, the sportive project, And sometimes for a young one also, whether he can carry on his studies.
And Baz, just a final question to you, because unfortunately time is up. We've had so much engagement as well from those of you watching, so thank you very much for that. We will be relaying it to both of our panellists. But my final question to you, Barry, is simply this, because I think we've already established that scouting is both art and science, and the balance differs from hire to hire. So simply this, how satisfying is it as a chief scout and as a scouting team to see Liverpool win the Premier League? Is that ultimately a vindication of your work? Of course, you're still going to be proud of everything you've done if you don't win a title, but Liverpool have had such amazing success in the last few seasons. Does that vindicate your work directly?
Well, we're really proud of it, delighted. It's a team of people. It's not one person. We've been here together as a group 8 years now, so that's an example that stability, getting the right people, does bring success. But what really drives us on is tomorrow, the next day. Are we going to be behind the curve? Are we missing out on something? What happens next window? What happens next season? That's what's driving everybody on. You sort of, there'll be a time when we'll all look back and celebrate and have a good time together. But at the minute, we've got a really driven, hungry group, totally across the board, and we're just looking forward to the future.
Great stuff. Well, Barry and Gérard, thank you so much for joining me. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's fascinating stuff. It's so rare that we get this kind of insight into scouting. Sorry, Gérard, go ahead.
Yeah, Barry is too humble to say that we need stability, but we also need quality, and he is quality. That proves on the pitch.
Thank you. Coming from you, thank you very much.